Bet the Board presents Stay Green. Stay Green is your first stop for all the metrics, matchups, and money-making opportunities at the track each race week. This is Stay Green, the NASCAR betting podcast. Here are your hosts, Todd Furman and racing analyst Chris Wormy.
Coke 600 weekend, one of the NASCAR crown jewels. And if you haven't watched this race in its entirety before, pack a 12 pack, pack a 24 pack, hell, bring a 30 rack to keep yourself busy for the festive holiday weekend. Welcome into the Stay Green podcast, a Bet the Board production as part of the Wondery Podcast Network. I'm your host, Todd Furman, joined as always by racing analyst extraordinaire Chris Wormy. And Wormser, it is the most festive weekend in all of motorsport. The Monaco Grand Prix first thing in the morning, the Indy 500 from Speedway, Indiana, and of course, the Coke 600 from Charlotte Motor Speedway, where you, my friend, will be in attendance looking to buy beverages for all of our most loyal Stay Green listeners.
Yeah. Hey, shoot me a DM. I'm happy to buy a beer, talk some racing. Charlotte's just an amazing race town. So you're just kind of everywhere you go, you just see NASCAR, you see racing. I even found myself at a dirt track last night at Millbridge. And man, I'm certainly into NASCAR and racing, but I still stuck out like a sore thumb. I showed up in white shoes and a white t-shirt, and everyone's got goggles on and masks covering their mouth, and dirt is everywhere. I had to reach out to Murph, our buddy who works at SHR, be like, hey, I need to use your washer and dryer because my stuff is wrecked. So it's been kind of a fun week here. Hit up the NASCAR Hall of Fame and got to visit SHR. Went to Hendrick today just to check out their museum. Took a pictures of a few cars that made me money and then a couple that cost me money. One of them being Jimmy Johnson's car where he won a Homestead. So I just set the record straight for everybody there that we're, hemming and hawing at this car. I wanted to let them know that, by the way, second best car that day, Kyle Larson had him covered, just in case you were wondering. So, but definitely awesome out here in Charlotte. If you're a race fan, you should definitely come check out this place. It just NASCAR everywhere you go.
For those folks new to the Stay Green podcast, we break this thing up into three very distinct stages. Stage one, usually all about what we learned from the previous race and how we can apply that going forward. Stage two, typically betting basics, but I buried the lead as we have a very special guest who is generous with his time. Adam Alexander, for those NASCAR fans out there, have seen his great work on Race Hub, part of the Xfinity telecast, and he has been a fixture in motorsports across all different disciplines. For our stage two piece, and then for stage three, we'll do a deep dive of the Coke 600. But before we get into stage two, and this will be the shortest stage one we do, I mean, you mentioned the experiences that you are partaking in. You got out to Charlotte pretty early this week. I mean, what's the whole itinerary look like for you? Then you left the home office in Phoenix. You're in a non-legal betting state to try and be able to partake in a little live betting. So I'm sure you'll have your runners working in full force for you over the weekend. But how are we laying this out? When did you get to Charlotte, and what else do you have on the itinerary outside of what you outlined for us already?
Yeah, that is funny that is part of what I've been doing since I've been here is messaging people. I'm on texting with Papa Joe. Hey, do you plan on live betting the race? Come
careful.
Sunday.
You honestly better be careful how much access you give Papa Joe. You're going to end up with bets that you had no idea you made. And I'm not quite sure they're going to end up in the plus side of the ledger. Yeah,
I can't imagine him. Well, He even said, would you like my opinion at all? It's like, no, I never want your opinion. But he got out here Monday and wanted to kind of really just get a chance to see the city. I have not spent extensive amount of time here. I did come to the Coke 600, but it was literally fly in, fly out last year. So I wanted to kind of experience just short track racing, hit up Millbridge last night, and just crazy to see just Carson Hocevar just walking around, Chase Briscoe just walking around, and Sheldon Creed. I mean, this is what these guys love to do. And it's kind of cool to see just what a Tuesday night in North Carolina looks like at a short dirt track. So a lot of fun. The NASCAR Hall of Fame was awesome. Got a little bit of a private tour there. Seeing NASCAR headquarters was also fun. And then tomorrow night, there's a fundraiser for Kyle Busch that I plan on attending. And then it's kind of the work week. You know, you have truck practice and the race on Friday, and then obviously it's cup practice on Saturday, and then the race on Sunday. So it's whenever there's 3 races on a weekend, you know, it's come Friday, it's kind of, you know, all work and no play until we see that checkered flag fly on Sunday night.
Will you be trackside for all 3 series races, for the truck race, the Xfinity race, weather permitting? Hopefully we get it to go off without a hitch on Saturday. And then, of course, the marathon that is the Coke 600 that starts in the bright sunshine, and the track changes considerably before we wave that checkered flag, sometimes early in the hours of Monday morning, if it's been a long enough race.
Yeah, the plan is to attend all on-track functions. However, the one that I would actually prefer to be kind of in the office or at my computer would be just cup practice. I do think that there's some valuable stuff here that I can actually get when I'm not at the track versus at the track. So that would be the only thing, the only on-track activity that I would miss. Other than that, I planned on going to all the races. I don't know if I'll stay for the whole Coke 600. I mean, traffic leaving last year at midnight was brutal. And I don't know if I can convince my wife to stay for all 600 miles of this race. So, but yeah, I love racing. I love being trackside for whenever I get a chance, and especially an opportunity, you know, the home of racing. I plan on being there at the track as much as I can be.
Should be an outstanding event. Jealous that you'll be there for all those festivities. We teased the interview with Adam Alexander to kick off this show. And without further ado, let's bring in one of the very talented voices of NASCAR. Thrilled to welcome on our next guest. And for those NASCAR fans that have been in and around the sport, and even IndyCar fans, which will inevitably get his take on that as well, given what's going on this weekend, is Adam Alexander. You, of course, can follow Adam on Twitter. That's Adam1Alexander. You can see him on the Xfinity broadcast. You can watch him on the hub. Adam, I feel like it's Monday through Thursday, but man, I can't keep up with your schedule, what days you're on, what days are Shannon, when Caitlin gets to fill in. I mean, they cut you guys into a million pieces during the Fox broadcasting portion of the schedule.
They really do. And, you know, it's funny. I go back to the days when I was on the air 4 days a week. We were Monday to Thursday, and it was co-host, which meant you had to be there every day. We didn't really have the backup plan and the depth that we have now. And with Caitlin coming on board and doing everything that she's doing for Race Hub, Josh Sims is now a part of our mix. In addition to his reporting duties at the track, he's in the host rotation with Race Hub. And then we've gone to solo hosting, which means you only need one person a week or one person a day. And that really spreads the week out pretty thin for all of us. And so it is busy. And I do have to check the schedule to make sure when I'm working, since I'm not working every day now. But across the board, it's a pretty good time, even though we've got to mark our calendar several days a week.
Well, as long as they're not scrambling to make sure 20 minutes before you guys go on air, they don't know exactly who's hosting. So I know they run a slightly tighter ship than that over there. A lot of friends and family, so to speak, that were great to me during my time on the hub. So always outstanding to see you guys doing well and continuing to flourish as the sport grows. But first spot we wanted to pick your brain on a little bit, a huge historic weekend officially in the books. NASCAR enthusiasts, historians had been counting the days down until North Wilkesboro was able to get back on the calendar. I don't think anybody envisioned that it was going to be the Cup Series having a chance to showcase some of the brightest stars in the sports under the brightest lights. Non-points paying race, the perfect way for NASCAR to showcase. But you were there. You were in the trenches. You were rubbing elbows with the drivers and the fans. Overall, how would you grade the return to North Wilkesboro? And does it give us reason to be optimistic that there are other ways that we can integrate this track and others that typically aren't on the circuit year in, year out?
I would give the weekend a 10. And really the week of 10. I was up in North Wilkesboro the Monday prior to the race. There was a big fundraising golf tournament, and the organization that put it on, that does golf tournaments everywhere, you know, in conjunction with races around the country, said it was as good a turnout as they've had and as big a fundraiser as they've had. So that gives you an idea of what that community did to embrace and endorse this event. And it really started there and worked its way throughout the week with the lesser series, the late models and that kind of thing that were running early to midweek. And then, of course, it builds up to the weekend when you had the trucks on Saturday and the All-Star race on Sunday night. And to me, they checked every box, from the traffic in and out, which everybody was stressed out about. That was all handled fantastic. The fan interaction and just how close everything was. And I even heard many drivers talk about this, just about how intimate that facility felt in comparison to some of the other places we go. It just was beyond comprehension that they could take North Wilkesboro, where you had not raced in NASCAR since 1996. If you drove by on Highway 421, and anybody who's been through the mountains of North Carolina and up toward Boone and that area is familiar with that drive and seeing the vines and the way everything looked from the outside at North Wilkesboro, to know the state it was in, to what they made of that place and the event they were able to put on over the weekend was amazing. And I know Kyle Larson beat him up pretty bad on the track, but beyond the fact that he was able to pull away and win easily, you had everything else covered this weekend.
I mean, that for me, and I don't want to speak on your behalf, Chris, so jump in, was eye-opening to me when Chris Myers had a chance to talk to Dale Jr. with Clint Boyer. And Dale talked about the challenges of just trying to recreate the track for racing, let alone being able to get cars on the track and turn it into the kind of showpiece that it really became. To your point, not just the Cup Series, but everything else that came along with the weekend. So a hat tip to NASCAR. Great to see, and obviously love that to try and open the opportunities that may be out there going forward to some other opportunities. But Chris, go ahead and jump in, man.
With the home runs that kind of NASCAR's had at these kind of one-off tracks, whether it's the Clash, which, last year I thought was a home run. They had done another great job this year. Then they take a chance on North Wilkesboro. Pretty much a home run. I mean, you can't please the fans everywhere, and someone's going to complain about something. So Kyle Larson snoozing the field, that's going to be the one complaint. But hey, you can only do so much as the sanctioning body. Is this something that you can see happening in the future? And if so, what are some of the tracks that have been, or could you maybe take a guess at some of the tracks where they might look to do this again in the future?
Well, there's no question. A lot of what we're talking about here is what's your attitude on, are you glass half full, glass half empty? And there's going to be a lot of fans in the NASCAR community that are old school that are going to say we shouldn't be doing some of these new things. Case in point, the Roval, instead of running the oval at Charlotte Motor Speedway in the playoffs, we're on the road course. Some people don't like that. I would say it's been a tremendous change of pace in the playoff lineup. Running on dirt at Bristol, there are many that are like, what are we doing? But again, it's been a good promotable event, and I thought the racing we had there on Easter this year was an enormous upgrade over what we saw last year, which is another step in the right direction of making that event something that could stick around or have a place on the calendar maybe every other year in the future. The Clash, now the All-Star race at North Wilkesboro. I do believe the door is open, and now NASCAR's vision is growing wider and much more into the future when it comes to the opportunities that exist, whether they're here in the States or maybe doing something overseas. And I would say that the tracks you should have on your radar, Nashville's Fairground Speedway is a place that everyone has circled, and I believe all anticipate the money is going to be there to go in and renovate that place, upgrade it the way it needs to be upgraded. So at the very least, you could go there and run an all-star race. But I think the long-term plan would be to make that a permanent stop on the calendar so that you can go there and run a points-paying race. We know what's happening in Chicago on the street course. That's a big, big wild card. But if that goes well at all, there are going to be a lot of cities around the country that are like, wait a minute, we don't have to build a racetrack. We don't have to spend, millions, maybe $1 billion to get all this infrastructure and parking and everything that comes with that. All we got to do is rework the city for a couple of weeks. And now we've got a racetrack that can host NASCAR. So that's a big one to see how that goes and what doors that opens down the road. But I really feel like NASCAR is as open-minded now and out of the box as they've ever been about trying new things. And a lot of that is because they bought themselves grace with some of the items I've talked about that they've done in recent years and how successful they've been.
Well, I mean, Adam, you mentioned the Chicago street course, and I think when you look at that from a NASCAR standpoint, do you think the success of that weekend will be graded more on the carnival atmosphere and some of the musical performances and everything that's going into it, more so than the actual on-track racing product that we're going to see? Because speaking candidly for Chris and I, when we look at it and try and figure out exactly what it's going to mean for us selfishly as sports bettors, we're not expecting the best racing product by any stretch of the imagination. You look at the configuration. I mean, I'm a Chicagoland native, and I've driven some of those areas, and I'm going, where the hell are the passing zones going to come from there? And we're actually going through it on a different scope out here in Vegas right now with the repaving that's taking place for the much anticipated F1 race that'll be out here in November. And I've driven these areas in Las Vegas going, you know what, this may be great from a spectacle standpoint, but I'm not quite sure if it's going to be single file conveyor belt type racing where there's going to be opportunities for true bumping and banging.
I think there's a couple of ways to look at that, and how you measure success if you're NASCAR and how you measure success if you're a race fan might be a little bit of two different things. And I'm not here to suggest that NASCAR doesn't want to satisfy the fan and send everybody home happy or give you a good experience if you're watching on television. But the one thing I would say is NASCAR continues to go through the growth process. You have to get to new markets. You know, I go to last year and they go to St. Louis, and that's a racetrack at Gateway Worldwide Technology that over the years was it was a facility that wasn't on par with some of the others. Now they've made tremendous upgrades and got it ready to host a cup race, but I felt like that venue being added to the schedule last year was more about the market than it was the track itself. You go there and it was an event. They did a great job with concerts and everything that went around the race to enhance the experience for all the race fans. So that is big. And that will be a key element in what will help measure the success level of what we see in Chicago. And we saw it at the Clash too. And I love a short track, and what they did with the LA Coliseum and turning it into a quarter-mile racetrack was amazing. But what also made that weekend a success is the fact that they had the concerts and everything was right there, and the fan got more than just their ticket to come in and watch the guys compete on the track. So I do believe it is the atmosphere around, maybe not as much, but right up near the top of being as much as it is about what you see on track and how the drivers race when the green flag goes in the air.
So I want to kind of stay on you can't make everybody happy, whether the on-track product or, some of the festivities that you can partake in. There was a producer on yesterday or on Door Bumper Clear. Was it Artie? Is that who?
Artie Kipner, our director.
Artie,
yep.
Yeah. And I thought that was fascinating to hear his side of the broadcast, because he kind of peeled back the curtain a little bit. And, selfishly as a sports bettor, and I like predictability, I want to see long green flag runs, and some fans want to see a lot of wrecks. As someone up there in the booth, what's kind of the best race for you to see? Because I guarantee you don't want to see all the long green flag runs. You want to have something, mix it up, but then also you don't want to have a wreck fest, because then it kind of turns silly. So I was just kind of curious, what's like an ideal race for you to, be in the booth and comment on?
Some of that might depend on what kind of track we're racing at. I look at Daytona Talladega, and the racing typically sells itself, even though you're probably going to get a big wreck at some point. The big wrecks there, what you hate about it is they're so massive that it can just bog things down and really ruin the rhythm. Love the racing there, but when you have a big wreck there, sometimes you pay the price with the type of show you can have. And I think it even hurts maybe the rhythm of the drivers, where the product isn't as good once you return to the green flag, or at least I've seen that from time to time. At a road course, I love a long green flag run, because that's when those strategies really start to play out. And I do enjoy a good strategy race. That to me is fun for us in the booth, because it just adds a little bit of an edge and energy as to what you're paying attention to and what you need to do to make sure the fans at home understand what's happening. But I would say the perfect scenario is what we had in the Xfinity race last week at Darlington. Not only did you have this epic finish with Kyle Larson and John Hunter Nemechek, who literally are banging off one another as they come off turn 4, but we did have a long green flag run, and that's what opened the door for Kyle Larson to drive all the way back up after a speeding penalty. He gets the caution he needs to tighten up the field, so he's got a chance to get a pit stop and get to restart to put himself in contention to win. We had a big wreck. We had a photo finish at the end of the stage. It had a little bit of everything. And to me, that's what you want, is a nice mix, so that you get to see the cards that everyone has. They have to put them on the table, and the best way to find that out is to put them in all different scenarios. But I would say, track to track probably dictates what you want to see as far as race style.
Well, I mean, we talked about being glass half full, and we can obviously be the eternal pessimist for a lot of things that have gone on. It feels like with the next gen cars, we've hit a home run as far as intermediate tracks are concerned. The 1.5 mile package has been outstanding. It's given us some of the best racing that I can remember over the last handful of years. However, with that, we haven't quite seen that translate on some of the short tracks, where it feels like there's one or two grooves that come in. We saw it manifest in North Wilkesboro, a little bit of a different story. We know the tire wear there, but every car seemed to fall off at the exact same time. Adam, what do you think we can do from a short track standpoint to rival some of the racing that we're seeing at the lifeblood of the sport at intermediates? Is it a softer tire compound? Is it a collaboration from the drivers, from Goodyear, from NASCAR in general? Speak a little bit about what you guys see in the booth and some of the conversations that you may be privy to that, the casual fan has no idea are actually taking place.
I'm not sure there's anyone in the NASCAR industry right now that feels comfortable with the next gen car and the short track package and how it's reacted. And I know they've gone to great lengths to try to get that where it needs to be, to make sure that these historic tracks that we go to, that traditionally are ones that, you circle on the calendar to make sure you don't miss, the Martinsvilles, the Bristols, the Richmonds, now a place like a North Wilkesboro, that show is as good as what fans expect it to be when they tune in. In the last couple of years, it just really hasn't been at that level. The one thing I would say, and I would never be critical of Goodyear, because I think, they've done an unbelievable job, but I do think they play a big role in the success of the races. And the reason I say that is because, and one thing I would say, it's not just Goodyear and the tire they bring, but the number of sets that teams are allotted. The one thing that we see on the truck and Xfinity side is you have fewer sets of tires. And so sometimes there's a game to be played, and you almost get this great racing byproduct of, okay, I'm going to save my tires and I'm going to stay out here and I'm on older tires. And other teams say, I'm coming here and I'm getting those tires. And maybe guys that aren't as good are getting to the front because they're on older or on better tires. And the guys at the front who have the better car stayed out for the track position, they fall back. And then it gets flipped the next time the caution comes out because that cycle of tires changes. I think if we had more variance in tire sets at the Cup level, that would really enhance the opportunity to create some good racing through strategy that would go a long way as far as creating that side-by-side that from time to time we don't see. And right now, the allotment of tires, most places, not everywhere, but most places you have so many sets of tires, caution comes out, you come and get your tires, and everybody's on a level playing field, and you don't get that back and forth, the coming and going, that really is what enhances it for the drivers, but ultimately for the fans who are watching.
Chris, don't tell that to Martin Truex Jr. and James Small when they had to go back out there in scuffs and weren't quite on the same page to try and be able to close things out. But
listening to the radio, it's like, oh man, they're either like brothers or like a married couple. But to speak to your point, I think Anthony Alfredo last year at Fontana, he kept his tires and almost went out and won that race. And then you saw, I think earlier in the Xfinity series this year, didn't John Hunter Nemechek stay out at Richmond? And
him and Sammy Smith.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like, whoops, that pretty much took him out of the race. To kind of stay in the Xfinity series, who are some of the, obviously there's some young talent that, I as someone that follows mainly the Cup Series, but also the truck and the Xfinity series, you got to be really excited about some of the young talent that's coming up and could potentially maybe find some rides in the Cup Series in the next few years and fill big shoes in the Cup Series.
Well, the one name that comes to mind right away. Oh, sorry, Chris.
I was gonna say, Chandler Smith and Sammy Smith would be those.
Yeah, well, I think they've been unbelievable as rookies. And the one that probably surprised me more than anything is Chandler Smith, because if you look at Colleague where he's driving this year, their program, I felt like, took a little bit of a step back last year. I know AJ Allmendinger had a great year, but I felt like a lot of that was just his experience and ability to manage a race more so than the sheer speed of those cars at Colleague. And a lot of that probably was they were competing full time at the Cup level, and that took a lot of their resources. And so, there's some give and take there. And that was, my hypothesis on maybe they weren't quite where they wanted to be last year. But having said that, going into this season, I'm like, I don't know if Chandler is in the position to make that step and overcome some of the challenges they faced a year ago. And he's been great. Probably should have won Las Vegas, did win Richmond. So he's a great one. Sammy Smith is as good a raw talent as we've seen. And I think, a lot of that's, right now is success has been because he's at Joe Gibbs Racing and those cars are always good. But I do believe he's incredibly talented as an 18-year-old that just graduated high school. But the one that I think right now is as poised as anyone to take the next step, and probably will very soon, is John Hunter Nemechek. He's been in a Cup car before, went back to trucks, won a bunch of races for Kyle Busch. Now he's running full-time for Joe Gibbs in the Xfinity Series. I believe it's a matter of time before he makes that step. And Josh Berry is probably going to get announced real soon in a cup ride. And he's a little older. He doesn't fit that mold. He's 32. So he's been around the block and got kind of a late start, but he's another one to watch out for in the coming years and in the cup car, because I do believe that announcement will come very soon that he's going to move up.
It's been incredible to watch, guys. John Hunter. I mean, Chris, I think back to the truck race where we watched him wreck north of the border when they were racing on the road course in Canada. I went, this guy clearly doesn't have the disposition to be that guy, but it created such a humbling experience for him that he was able to race at the top levels, went all the way back to the truck series and went, I want to be in good equipment. I want to prove that I have the disposition and the maturity to be able to go out there. And whether it's being a father of two, being married and trying to figure out, hey, look, I have this glorious opportunity in front of me. I need to be more composed. And to John Hunter's credit, the way he's handled himself in some of these post-race interviews, specifically with Kyle Larson and Darlington, I think speaks volumes about where he is. And talent was never the question that we had about John Hunter. It was, all right, is this guy built for all the ups and downs that are going to come with it? So I think whoever's been in his ear to advise him, most likely his dad and the team around him, deserves a ton of credit for getting him in a spot, showing that he's extremely worthy of being in that kind of ride. But Adam, you're in and around the Xfinity Series, even more so than the Cup, at least on race weekends, calling all of those races. And this weekend, a very special opportunity that you guys were creative to come up with at Fox, that it's the drivers only broadcast. I'm not saying you get to sit in the lazy boy and kick your feet up, but you get the chance to bring in some of these Cup drivers into the booth. How much fun is it to see the Cup perspective and these guys kind of take over soup to nuts, calling the studio side, calling the X's and O's track side, pit reporters, and everything else? Walk us through what it took to get this off the ground and feel comfortable that the quality of broadcast was going to be there with some of the familiar faces we see alongside you every Saturday during the season.
Well, I would say that, I've been part of many interviews over the last however many years it's been when it comes to the drivers only process. And not just that, backing up, just those drivers coming up and being in the booth with us. It all began 2015 when we'd had one driver from the Cup Series come up and join Michael Waltrip and me. And then we decided, well, let's take that a step further and let's have two drivers from the Cup Garage come up and join Adam. And people ask me, how is that possible? And they've tried to give me credit for facilitating that. And I'm like, I don't think you understand how talented this group of people are when it comes to athletes that have the ability to come over and be a broadcaster. It speaks to, I think, how media savvy they just all are. And a lot of that probably is because in NASCAR, you're not just an athlete that does media interviews. You are truly a spokesperson for companies because of the sponsorship element of NASCAR. And so that's what really sets them up to be able to do what they do on a regular basis with us on Saturdays. Having said that, when they do the takeover drivers only, that's a whole new level. And we truly just throw them to the wolves. And I remember the first time we did this, Kevin Harvick was going to be the play-by-play, and he's been that every year. Kevin said, you got to come meet with me. I mean, I got to understand how you get from point A to point B and whatever. And we went over some of the cheat sheet stuff. And it was so funny because Kevin, who is a true student of the game, is taking notes and rehearsing and doing all this stuff. And then it's like the red light goes on and all of that just goes away. And he just lets himself be who he is. And he's done a great job. And credit to him and all of those guys. And I have to say, it, day off, whatever you want to call it, it's fun for me to be able to sit in the back of the room and watch someone else do that. Because, and I will also say, these guys are unbelievable at what they do. They come in there and in our world, 100% respectful of us and our entire organization, the way we go about our business, whether it's in the booth or coming into the studio and doing Race Hub, whatever it is. I give them a lot of credit because their attitude and approach to all of it has been nothing but class.
It's incredible to watch and to see how those guys go and listening to Kevin Harvick talk about it, how he goes, yeah, you can have the best laid plans and suddenly you start watching the race and you forget you have to speak to it and try and paint that picture for the viewer at home and not just get fixated on some of the on-track action when guys like yourself are able to carry the broadcast through and make sure you can fill in some of those gaps. But it's outstanding to get some of that Cup perspective from guys that we know are going to be racing on Sundays, talking about the talent they see on Saturdays and you being able to pull it out of them, which may be a bucket list item for them. But I have to ask, and we have a couple other questions for you before we let you go. You've called college basketball. You've called college football. You've obviously been in and around motorsports for 20 plus years now. But what's on the Adam Alexander sports broadcaster bucket list? Is it a Super Bowl? Is it a World Cup final? Is it calling an F1 race at Monaco? I mean, if you had to put yourself in a spot and you go, I want to call one sporting event, what would you want to call more than anything else to be the lead personality?
I would say bucket list for me, and I hate that, this is not something that's in our lineup at Fox right now, but I'm a college basketball guy, and, I grew up a college basketball fan, and, so the NCAA tournament and, some of that would be cool to be a part of, just knowing the magnitude of that event. Obviously, we don't have that at Fox, so that's one that's probably not going to get checked off anytime soon. And then I would say when it comes to the Fox family, having been a part of the NASCAR lineup, someday getting to do the Daytona 500 would be really special. I did the Indy 500 on radio growing up in Indianapolis, and having family there and having relationships there. And I worked with MRN radio. And when the folks at Indy found out I was working for MRN, they said, you're an Indy guy, you should come back and do the 500. So I did 3 years on pit road for the 500 and 3 years in the turn. And that was magical, to grow up as a kid listening to that race, because it's always blacked out. You can't watch it in Indianapolis on TV live. And so the lifeline for every motorsports fan in Indianapolis for the 500, if you're not there, is to listen to it on the radio. So to get to be a part of that was really cool. And having been around our coverage for as many years as I have, and as big as the 500 is for Fox, that would be something that would be really special to get to be a part of.
So, I mean, for me, I can't make promises. I'm a CBS employee, but maybe if Evansville ever gets to the Final Four, I'll try and pick up the phone and see if I can get to Sean McManus and company and go, hey, look, we got a guy that really wants to be on the call. We know Jim Nance is out of the booth at this point, going purely to golf, that you got to give Adam a shot to try and call a school he grew up very close and personal, near and dear to him, the opportunity to call a Final Four game if the Purple Aces ever get all the way that deep into the NCAA tournament.
Well, I'll tell you, in 1999, that's the last time, sadly, that Evansville went to the tournament. I was doing the games for Evansville. I was their radio play-by-play guy. We went to New Orleans, and that's when you still played opening weekend at the Domes, right? I mean, it was huge. And so we were playing at the Superdome in New Orleans. And that weekend, Utah was there with Rick Majerus. They were great. That was the Wally Zerbiak year from Miami of Ohio when they got to the Sweet 16. Kansas was there. Kentucky was there as the defending NCAA champions. It was a who's who. And because of that, Jim Nance and Billy Packer, Bonnie Bernstein were the CBS crew that were on site. So I'll never forget, first time this kid from Indiana getting to go to the NCAA tournament and call games, and you walk out for shoot around and there's Jim Nance doing his homework and Billy Packer's like, I mean, it was a dream. I still think about that today and how magical and surreal that was for me. So maybe someday I'll get back there, but I have no regrets. Everything's been good. The business has been way better to me than I deserve. That's for sure.
Hey, it's a credit to your talent and commitment to the craft, no doubt, that's given you the opportunities to try and do all that. But we are a sports betting show, so Chris and I'd be remiss before we get into a little bit of an Indy 500 discussion, because I'd love to get your take on expectations for Kyle Larson in the future and what we think he might be able to do when he makes his debut. We know NASCAR has forged partnerships with a lot of the biggest sports books that are out there. They're working hand in hand, trying to grow fan engagement and a different level of viewership. We've seen the individual teams getting involved, whether it's Unibet on Kevin Harvick's car or DraftKings with Bubba Wallace. We've seen a variety of these different operators. It goes on. MGM with Tyler Reddick and of course, Austin Dillon as part of RCR. Where do you see sports betting fitting into the growth of NASCAR in general? And do you think it's a valuable vehicle to try and introduce some newer fans to the sport, especially during the slower times of year where NASCAR doesn't have to compete on the weekends with the NFL, college football, the NBA playoffs, or a variety of other things in a very congested sports betting menu?
Well, I can tell you that I have many friends that growing up, they were huge, huge sports fans. And as we've gotten older and our times have changed, our lives have changed, they say that sports don't mean near as much to them anymore unless they got money riding on it. So I would say that anytime you can add that, you're going to attract new fans, new viewers. So I wholeheartedly believe that sports gambling is something that has enhanced the way people approach sports and how interested they are, and for obvious reasons. And I'll tell you, I was at Lowe's recently, And I don't, hopefully that's no conflict of interest here when it comes to your sponsors.
No, you can promote anything and anything you want here, Adam. It's
well,
a safe
I'm not
space
promoting them, but I was in there because I had an issue with an item I had purchased, and I'm a customer service, and I'm waiting for the manager, and it's taking a little time and whatever. And I had on, it was the week of the Masters, and I'm wearing like a Masters golf shirt. It's got the logo on it, right? And this man walks by and he's got a different color vest on, and it says like assistant manager. I'm like, oh, this guy's going to be my lifeline, you know? And he reaches down in his vest and he pulls out his phone and he's like, hey, I got some numbers for you here. And he's like, I like your shirt. And hey, thanks, you know? And I'm like, well, he's going to tell me about what I need to get my item. Because he starts reading off his bets for the Masters to me. Oh my gosh, what's happening here? I'm like, I thought I was going to get my new grill. And I'm hearing who he's got money on when it comes to the tradition, unlike any other. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you got a little money on it, you're going to follow it closely, and that's good for all of us.
A little John Rahm exposure, hopefully, was one of the names that he rattled off if he was able to cash an outright ticket there, to say the least. When we look to Memorial Day weekend, obviously one of the biggest race weekends across motorsport in general. We kick things off overseas with the Monaco Grand Prix. We obviously go into the Indy 500, and then we close with the crown jewel on NASCAR, the only race on the schedule that has 3 different stage breaks with the 600-mile marathon. You mentioned Indy and how close you've been to that sport. When you look at the Indy 500, you look at the Coke 600, how important is this race day on the calendar and what it means to you in general for how all the things fit together, Adam?
Yeah, you know what? It is really big, and it's a great day for me just as a fan, and to know that you've got it wall to wall. And it's always great when you go out to the Charlotte Motor Speedway for the Coke 600 and the buzz starts building mid-afternoon because the Indy 500 is finishing. And even though this is the foundation of what our sport is all about in NASCAR, you can't help but keep one eye on what's happening at Indy, because typically there's a great finish, and it's going to be, you know, a huge part of the equation. When you talk about motorsports at the water cooler on Monday, you want to know what happens there. And so everybody's got one eye on what's coming up at Charlotte, but you also have one eye on what's finishing in Indianapolis. And, you know, you had said it, but we've had it before, and we'll have it again next year with Kyle Larson. Anytime a driver is doing the double, what's happening in Indy obviously takes on added significance, because you're so curious about what someone can do there before they come to Charlotte and run the 600 miles. So the magnitude of that day as a race fan is enormous.
I think the one thing that, you know, Chris and I have talked about at great lengths, when you hear some of the iconic names in F1 that have tried driving stock cars and going sight unseen into driving with some of the best in NASCAR, whether it's Jenson Button or Kimi Räikkönen, how they talk about how difficult the transition is. So as a NASCAR fan, selfishly, I think we'd love nothing more than to see Kyle Larson go out there and be able to dump as much whole milk on his head in victory lane.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
As humanly possible, since he can race anything and everything out there. We know he will definitely be prepared. But Chris, before we let Adam go, I wasn't sure if there are any other questions. You wanted to pick a winner for the 600 or anything along those lines?
Well, yeah, last year Adam, I had a chance to do the double. So I went to the Indy 500 and had a friend help me out, getting me to Charlotte. And I wanted to always do the 500. It was like, I just wanted to do it. The pageantry, I needed to do it. But I'll tell you what, when I got to Charlotte Motor Speedway and to just see kind of, side-by-side racing, I was like, oh, I love this. And I don't want to necessarily go for a pick for the 600. I'm just kind of curious. I'm kind of curious who you think could compete with this 5 and 24, those two cars at this point. You know, I know that there's going to be a lot of changes that happen throughout the summer, the heat, and some of these other tracks where we don't have a lot of history. I'm just curious what teams, or are there going to be drivers that are going to step up? Because right now it looks like it's the 5, the 24 is a tick behind, and then everybody else is, kind of just vying for third.
I would say keep an eye on the 1. I feel like Ross Chastain, regardless of what kind of track we go to, is competitive. And obviously he's been consistent. He's leading the overall points right now, even though he's not been able to win. The Fords have struggled, and I have concerns about that organization right now. But I would say, don't write off yet the guys from Joe Gibbs Racing and Toyota as a whole. North Wilkesboro, forget about it. They were second and third at 23-11, and Ty Gibbs, did find his way in from the open and got a top 10 finish. But if you go back to our last mile-and-a-half race, Martin Truex Jr. was outstanding early. Denny Hamlin obviously closes. Another top 5 for Bubba Wallace. I have tremendous faith in Tyler Reddick, and not just as a driver, And he's got a great average finish in the Coke 600. But when we get into this road course portion of the season this summer, he's going to be someone you have to deal with. So if I'm betting this weekend, even though it might not be a good return on my investment, I would put money on the 5 and the 24. But I think you have to really keep an eye on what's happening, not only with Ross Chastain, but that Toyota group. To me, this is their time of year when they typically turn it up. And I would anticipate you'll see some of that, especially with it being a mile and a half this weekend.
Well, I mean, Chris, you pointed it out. It might be the first time all year we have to make an adjustment based on paint scheme for Tyler Reddick and that powder
Tyler
blue
Reddick
car. I mean, that's a car that's might be priced 18-1 in the betting market, but with that kind of mojo, he should be up there amongst the favorites. You guys can
just
follow
based on
Adam.
The paint scheme. The paint scheme itself should be the favorite of the race. Just, I mean, it is that's, I think it just to, sorry to cut you off, Todd.
Oh, no worries.
I think that what 23XI has actually done with their paint schemes. I've never cared about a paint scheme in my entire life until Kurt Busch at Kansas last year had just kind of that Jordan paint scheme with that kind of vintage, visual of that car, and then to have it win, and then to go to Richmond last year and to have my favorite shoe, the 11s, the Jordan 11s, be a paint scheme on a car. I was like, oh, this is awesome. It's the first time I've ever cared. And then to see it this week, that powder blue with just the Jumpman logo, I'm like, man, they are just hitting a home run with these the library there.
Hey, they do a great job trying to make it appealing as possible. Even the Bubba Wallace Columbia car last weekend that came in second at North Wilkesboro. You guys can, of course, follow Adam Alexander on Twitter. That's Adam1Alexander. You can watch him, I'd say Monday through Thursday on the Hub, but he said he even know his schedule week to week. So it all depends on the day. You can watch him on the Fox Xfinity broadcast. Of course, not this weekend. He's the one playing Puppet Master to try and make sure all the drivers are on the best behavior. But Adam, we know how busy the last couple of days have been. We know how excited you are about the 600 weekend and when it's a NASCAR game in Charlotte and what the 500 means. So can't thank you enough for creating a little bit of perspective. And hopefully as we inch closer towards the playoffs, we'll be able to take a few minutes of your time and get you on here when your schedule obligations open up and you go back to college football and college basketball on top of everything else.
I look forward to it. Thanks a lot for having me. Always enjoy the conversation.
Always great, Chris, when we get fresh perspective. Adam, can't say it enough, extremely generous with his time. I mean, we only share portions of the interviews that we do with these guys and girls as we talk to them before, we talk to them after, and knowing how busy their schedules are. It's always refreshing to hear how excited they truly are and their passion comes through for not just anything NASCAR with Adam, but for all things motorsport. And obviously his love for college basketball, being an Indiana boy through and through.
Well, I think that's kind of the ongoing theme is, everyone that participates kind of in this NASCAR media world, they all have their love of other sports. So really cool to kind of talk about, some of the history of, back even when he was working in Indy and doing some of the MRN stuff or some of the radio stuff for the 500. And you could just tell he just lights up when he's talking about the Indy 500 and some of the college basketball stuff he's done in the past. And to kind of touch on, in my opinion, one of the greatest paint schemes of all time is running this week in Tyler Reddick's powder blue, man. I love that thing. I'm excited to see that in person.
You have to imagine there are plenty of North Carolina basketball fans out there that'll be tuned in, and I'm sure it warms Michael Jordan's heart as well to see the powder blue out there on essentially what amounts to his home track and home race there. As we start stage 3, we obviously talked to Adam a little bit about the Indy 500, and I know you are a man of many talents and many disciplines. You've handicapped the Indy 500 extensively in the past. Do you find the sport to be as beatable as what it's been previously? Have you adjusted your handicapping? And quite frankly, do you have any plans to be invested for the greatest spectacle in motorsport Sunday afternoon before all eyes shift from IndyCar to the Cup Series?
Well, I used to, but then I started this podcast, and that takes up just a little bit more of my time. So
here we go. Here we go.
Yeah,
Can we take out my mini violin for you to play right now? And
you.
I'm sure all the listeners will be very sympathetic to your cause.
Yeah. No, I do. And it's not as much as I would say like the Cup Series. It probably looks more like a Cup card where I have just a couple of outrights that I think provide a little bit of value and in entertainment. I love watching the Indy 500. I thought that going to the race last year, seeing the pageantry and, kind of just everything that goes into this massive, massive event is awesome to see. I recommend everyone go see it if you have a chance. But, I like to wait till carb day. I think that's usually the best indication. That'll be Friday when we get these cars. They're shaking them down before the race. Everyone kind of has, they have an idea of what the forecast will be so they can kind of set up their cars, more geared towards what it'll look like on Sunday. And I feel like that's usually the best indication of where these guys should pan out, when the checkered flag drops. So we might even have some, if something kind of stands out from a matchup perspective, might be able to give that out on at bettheboard.com or bettheboardpod.com, Todd. Which one?
Yeah, exactly. And we'll tweet it out. Hopefully we got something
Okay.
Potentially in the crosshairs, maybe a little double dip on Sunday. I can't imagine we'll find anything to stumble into for Monaco unless you want to lay $13 on Max Verstappen to lead every single lap, barring some on-track incident. I have to imagine that the Red Bull car will be in victory lane. So we will see. One last thing on the Indy 500 before we get into the Coke 600. If you found yourself in victory lane as winner of the race, are you a skim milk guy? Are you 2%?
Oh, no.
Are you whole milk? Are you chocolate
I'm going
milk?
whole milk, baby.
I wasn't sure.
That's only if they didn't have heavy cream.
Well, I mean, I figured you might be the first guy to try and go, and you know what? I'm going to go with a little bit of oat milk here because I don't want to go dairy and try and really throw a wrench in all the traditionalists out there at Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
No, I actually heard, I don't know, I think maybe Connor Daly saying that, if you choose anything but whole milk, it's like, come on, this is you're going to choose to pick this battle. Like, come on, just get yourself some whole milk. So I mean, that's where I'm going. And I'll tell you what, whenever I hit a big winner, I do go buy a jug of milk and do a little chugging just out of, respect for the sport. So,
all right, well, that's just weird. That's just weird on a variety of ways. For being a NASCAR guy, I'd expect you to chug a cheapest can of domestic light beer you can find, whether it's a Keystone Light, Busch Light, or something along those lines.
No, I like to start, at 6 a.m., Monaco. Nice to have like a very like martini-esque type drink in the morning, and then, work my way into a milk, maybe a White Russian. For the Indy 500, and then I get to the light beer because that's a marathon, man. I mean, just going back and watching the Coke 600 from last year, 5 hours and 36 minutes of coverage. I mean, it was listening to it at 1.75 times. It was a 4-beer race. So, to see it there in person it's a commitment. It's a day of drinking and certainly some gambling and some fun.
Well, at least it gets started for you at a little bit more modest time at 9 o'clock
Correct.
local out there on the East Coast. So when we look at the Coke 600, obviously this race has added significance and importance to you specifically. And we talked a little bit about it last year when we kicked off this podcast, but I kind of want to revisit that. It's obviously one of the NASCAR crown jewel races. It's the longest race on the schedule and the only one that has 4 stages divided into 150 laps a pop. But it's also the most patriotic race on the calendar. And if you can lean into your experience a bit in terms of why you were there at the Coke 600 last year, just as a refresher and how important this event has become to you and your family.
Yeah. So I lost my brother in 2018 to veteran suicide. And it's something that's just been near and dear to my family's heart. And last year to have the opportunity, I'd always told myself that I wanted to go to the Indy 500. And so I was just one of those things where I should stop saying the word should and just do it. So I just booked a ticket and it's like, I'm going to the Indy 500. And this was about the same time that we were working with NASCAR and getting the pod launched. And I know that they commemorate drivers drivers commemorate fallen soldiers for the Coke 600. So I had reached out to my contacts at NASCAR and they said, listen, you're kind of a little late. This is something that fills up. But they made an exception and they put my brother's name on the pace car, which was out there an awful lot last year. So, but I was going to be at the Indy 500. So a good friend of mine, Chris McCarley, said, I'll take care of the transportation. And so we went to the Indy 500 and went to a little airport and flew right into there's a little private airport next to the track there in Concord. Unfortunately, we did have some missteps, had to get a different plane. Here I am complaining. I could have flown commercial, and here we are. But it's just nice to be in a sport where, and not that other sports aren't. I just think NASCAR does such a great job at recognizing just soldiers and the people in our military that came before us or that are no longer with us. And that's just something that's so important. And my mom even said, that's just a race I like to go to. And she was able to come last year along with my dad. And it's just cool to see the appreciation, and kind of unwavering appreciation for the military and veterans. So something I enjoy doing. And I don't know that I've ever talked about this on the podcast, but I do have one thing that before the race, I do have a little superstition is I don't watch pre-race ceremonies. I always change the channel, and I don't do that out of a superstitious, like, oh, I don't win when I watch. It's just one of those things where I don't actually give it the attention it deserves. And I don't participate in the prayer or whatever it may be. So I just found that if I'm not going to give it that full attention, there's no reason for me to watch it. So whenever I say I'm going to a race, I tell my friends and families, hey, do you want to go catch the pre-race ceremonies? That means I'm going to the race, because otherwise I don't watch it, just because I don't give it the proper attention that it should. So I'll be watching the pre-race ceremonies. It's always kind of an emotional time. They see the flyover and, it's a lot for people that have lost loved ones in that way. So I'm excited to do it. My wife's going to meet me out here, so she'll be in Friday night. She's going to go to the Xfinity race and the Cup race, and I'm excited. It's just a great weekend.
No, I'm glad you guys will have the opportunity to do that, and important to try and tell your stories. I know how close you and your brother were, given those unfortunate circumstances. So great to see NASCAR giving back in that variety of ways. And if Chris is actually listening to the podcast, I've never met him. And he wants to take us to Monaco in the Coke 600 next year. Chris, make sure you file an early request for that PJ to see if we can be able to make that happen. So I'm going to launch that right now, knowing it's about 1,000 to 1, if not higher, to be able for that to come to fruition. But like they always say, if you believe it, you can achieve it. And we'll put that out in the universe to see if it. One of our wealthiest listeners, and we may not even know who's out there, may volunteer and want to spend quality time with you and I.
Yeah, that'd be great. The other thing too is I looked at, until they have the supersonic jets again, you can't catch all 3 races. That would be like a, maybe a bucket list, because I know that there are some. I know, at least shows up on my Twitter feed that United is working on a supersonic jet. So hurry it up, because I'd like to be able to catch the Monaco race, the Indy 500, and the Coke 600. So if we could do that before I die, I think that would be like the ultimate bucket list just for every racing fan on earth. I think that'd be amazing.
You may have to watch the holy trinity of racing from space to be able to see that happen all in the same day. Yeah. When we look at Charlotte Motor Speedway, as we always do, track specifics here. Charlotte Motor Speedway became the first modern super speedway to host night racing back in 1992. It's a 1.5 mile low tire wear track, although that's slightly changed over the last couple of races when we look at how we go about handicapping it. 24-degree banking in the corners, 5-degree banking on the straightaways. I found this stat interesting from the Charlotte Motor Speedway website itself. During a typical race weekend, it said fans consume more than 34,000 slices of pizza, 9,500 gallons of soda and water, 13,000 plus feet of hot dogs, and 309,000 pounds of ice consumed. What I found interesting, though, is they didn't mention any adult beverages in there in terms of gallons of beer, hard liquor, or anything along those lines. So I was a little bit disappointed. So if Charlotte Motor Speedway and any of the people associated with that track are out there listening, I would like that included. But as far as track comps are concerned, is this as simple as, hey, it's a 1.5 mile track, we're going to use Kansas, we're going to use Vegas, or are there different ways that you go about beginning your process when you're handicapping the 600?
Yeah, it's Vegas and Kansas. I think that Darlington, although it kind of does race like 1.5 miles, I think it just races very, very differently. And I think the setups are much different as well. Now, I would favor Kansas more. I just feel like that race it's just been, it's been 3 weeks ago, that race. So obviously the cars have changed a little bit from Vegas. I do think that it's just a good baseline to start for speed. If you have speed at Vegas, that first 1.5 miles, you're probably going to have it at Kansas. But also Kansas has some more tire wear. We're going to see, this is more of a mid tire wear track. Usually if you run 15 or 20 laps, you're going to see guys on pit road wanting 4 fresh tires. So, but this is just a completely different beast. This is a marathon. That you're going to practice during the day, you're going to start the race during the day, and then you're going to finish this at the dead of night. So the track goes through many transitions. So to just look at maybe a 1.5 mile track, or even just Kansas alone, I don't think you're doing yourself too many favors. I think it just gives you a good baseline. But this is a different animal. This is just a marathon, and you have to approach handicapping it much differently.
So knowing that, then how much does that change your process? Because obviously we can look at practice times and get an indication of who's fast. We can look at recent track history. We can try and identify some of the unique aspects that typically will represent a lion's share of exactly how we go about building our betting card. Does that get thrown out the window for this particular race? Because it is a marathon, and the better teams, the better crew chiefs, and the better drivers are going to be able to change their cars on about 37 short cautions or stage breaks and everything else, that what you see for lap 1 is going to be a far cry from the car that you see on the track in lap 396.
I think that obviously adjustability is important, just staying ahead of the track and kind of where the track makes transitions. But I think the biggest thing is what drivers and teams are able to recover from mistakes. If that is something you're not able to do, I don't want to be invested in you at all, just because you're going to have so many laps, something bad is going to happen. It's how you recover. Now, I understand that, having an issue early in the race is not the same as having it late in the race, but when it comes down to it, you just want someone that can recover. And so when I'm looking at this, I like to bet some of these matchups where guys are maybe running like, 18th to 22nd. I like to bet those. However, in this race, those teams don't recover as well as some of the elite teams. So I like to, it's usually a smaller card. I'll probably steer clear of outrights unless I see, some higher odds guys, but it'll be probably just a few matchups and then some live betting if I can get my hands on some accounts where I can get down.
All right. We may as well get into some of the drivers to watch this weekend. And when you look at the previous winners, Denny Hamlin victorious in 2022. It was Kyle Larson grabbing the checkered flag in 2021. Brad Kay back in 2020. And from 19 to 17, it was Martin Truex Jr., Kyle Busch, and Austin Dillon. 2016, I won't even mention. It feels like Martin Truex Jr. led 737 laps of what the normal allotted distance being 400 laps, much like Kyle Larson at North Wilkesboro last weekend. So speaking of Kyle Larson, we'll start with the favorites. And Larson sees himself widely available in that 4.5 to 5 range. Recent form, well, it speaks for itself. He does have 2 victories in points-paying races, 5 top 5s, 5 top 10s. Most impressively, though, for using 1.5-mile tracks is a good indication of what we're going to see this weekend. Back-to-back top 2 finishes there. And when you look at his 600 form, won the race in 2021 and last year, he tried to make the race as difficult as he possibly could on himself. Obviously ends up finishing inside the top 10, but clearly had a car capable of winning that race.
Well, if somebody is going to dominate this race, it's probably going to be the 5 car. And you'd think that a race this long might be really tough to actually go out and, I guess, dominate. But he's done it before. And Martin Truex did it back in 2016, as you referenced to, but also Kyle Larson did it again in 2021. Now, last year, he made it really hard on himself. And he went to not only did he start from the rear, but in the first 150 laps of the race, he went to the rear 2 other times and was still able to, with 35 or 40 to go, take the lead. He did have an issue with Chase Briscoe late, but and wasn't able to win. But, when you're looking at long races like this, you just need people that are able to battle back. And I think this is one of those teams that's been able to go from the rear and work their way back up to the front. The one thing about this price is this price isn't going anywhere. I can imagine that Kyle Larson will be priced between 4 and 5 to 1 between now, through practice and qualifying, and through stage 1. I just don't see this price going anywhere. I think that if, at this point in the week, there's no reason to listen. I don't think there's any reason to get in at this price. However, I do not blame anybody if they were to say, listen, take all your money and put it on Kyle Larson. I do think that he should be the favorite to win this race. I would not be shocked if he went out there and actually put down a snoozer. This is a great track for him, and I expect it to be good. I think there's only one other person that could really dominate the way that Kyle Larson can, and that's his teammate in William Byron.
Well, you mentioned William Byron, and of course, his odds not exactly long shot pricing by any stretch of the imagination, just a tick lower. When we talk about his recent form, North Wilkesboro, a race that he would just as soon forget as he finished well off the pace. But before that, 4 straight top 10 finishes coming into the non-points paying race. 6 top 5s this year, 7 top 10s, a couple of wins, 1 in Vegas, 3rd at Kansas. And we look at the 600 form for the 24 car, 3 straight top 5 starting positions in the race. And his last 3 finishes, not exactly the model of consistency, 32nd, 4th, or 12th, but clearly the 24 has shown plenty of speed week in, week out.
Yeah, I think if you actually look at William Byron's history, you're actually not doing him very much justice, because this year it's almost like this team has taken off. The other thing that I like about William Byron is, and I think this is something that Ross Chastain actually doesn't understand quite yet, is sometimes you don't have a race-winning car. And sometimes a 4th or 5th place finish is great for the season-long, championship. And that's another reason why I like William Byron is he's not going to put himself in a position to maybe, checkers or wreckers. That's just not his style. I think he'll take, if he's got a 3rd or 4th place car, he's happy finishing there. Obviously, these guys want to win. But if you look at, a couple weeks ago at Darlington, that's exactly what he was doing. And then what happens? You get the top 2 guys to wreck each other, and then he has to beat a 3-legged donkey in Kevin Harvick and win the race. So I do like William Byron for his patience, and I think that anything that has HMS under the hood, that Hendrick power is the real deal. And I think everyone is kind of chasing the 5 and 24. And I expect him to kind of run up front all day. If he gets out to the front, I think it might be hard for Kyle Larson to pass him. I do think that it'll be a possibility, but if anyone's going to snooze this entire field, it's going to be either the 5 or the 24.
If we're going away from the HMS camp, clearly JGR is a force to be reckoned with as well. Denny Hamlin's priced right around 7-1. And when you look at his recent form, just 3 top 5s this season, 5 top 10s overall. His average finish, though, at 12th this season is second best in the series behind only Chase Elliott. And Chase, obviously, a much smaller sample size in the grand scheme of things. Denny wins Kansas on the last lap pass over Kyle Larson, finished 11th at Vegas. But when we look at the 600, I mean, this is a guy who we know gets better as the race gets longer. The more he has a chance to tune his car and work through some of the issues that are there. There's no doubt the 11, very much a contender, at least on paper.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think they're a tick off on speed. And he was the best car at Kansas. I fully believe that, even though I was heavily invested in Larson there, I still think that Denny Hamlin had the best car. And, then you kind of look to Darlington, and I know that Darlington isn't an exact replica, but he really usually is really good there. And for the fact that he struggled a little bit at Darlington, I know that he mentioned on his podcast that they did have some damage to the car, but, the car that I saw in practice was not anywhere as good as some of the other cars out on that track. I think that, that they were not destined for that top 5 finish from, when practice even going green. So I like Denny Hamlin. He's just a gritty guy. He's always going to be there at the end. On a late race restart, he can always, pull something, pull a rabbit out of a hat. But he does make a lot of mistakes. And, at 7-1, I don't know. He's going to make a mistake. It's just a matter of, was it going to be in stage 1, 2, or is it going to be in stage 3 or even 4? So I think, like I said, I don't see this price going anywhere. He could pull it. And I still think he's going to go off at 7-1. So I don't think there's any reason to get involved with him at this point in the week.
Denny, probably not the only one in the JGR camp that'll have a chance to have a very good race car. Martin Truex is shown to be heating up a little bit before his 31st place finish at Darlington. That came after he messed up his car at the close of stage 2. 5 straight races, 11th or better. Before that, if we remove Dega, which we obviously always should, 292 of the 383 laps he's led this year came in the last 3 races before going to Wilkesboro. And we look at the 600 form, best finish in the last 3 600s was actually 9th in 2020, but he has shown capabilities to go out there and snooze the field. I have to imagine it's rinse and repeat when you're looking at the pre-week odds for the 19.
Yeah, listen, I think that when it comes to raw speed, I think that the 19 is probably the fastest Toyota. I think Denny's probably getting a little bit more out of his car than Martin Truex Jr. But what we've seen with Truex is, and we saw it a little bit at Darlington, is when he loses that track position, if he's out there leading a lot of laps, and he was super fast out front, when he lost track position, his car was not great in that disturbed air. And I don't know if they made the proper adjustments to help him work his way back through the field. Where Truex, I think, actually has a little bit better chance if maybe he starts maybe 9th, 10th, or 11th and is able to drive up through the field and understand the way that his car is going to act in that dirty air. So that way, if he does find himself losing track position in whatever capacity, they can actually adjust in that car and recover a little bit. I certainly think that this is going to be the fastest Toyota. It's just a matter of, can they stay out ahead of the track? I know that, Martin and his crew chief definitely have an interesting, communication regimen when it's listening to the radio. And it's just a matter of, can they stay ahead of the track? And if they do find themselves in trouble or they lose a little bit of track position, are they able to dig themselves out of that hole? If they don't have adjustability in their car, you could see him kind of ride around in 10th place. But if they do work in some adjustability, I think he can work his way back up to the front. Again, his price is not going anywhere, even if he, pulls it and looks great in practice and qualifying.
Adam mentioned a driver who we know has been the model of consistency. Unfortunately, just isn't getting the finishes there. That, of course, being Ross Chastain. And you see him priced in a very similar range to a lot of other very talented drivers. Chastain, 10-1-ish. Christopher Bell, 10-1 as well. And Chase Elliott going into that same mix. Ross Chastain, look, he doesn't have a lot of history to go off of here at the Coke 600, so I think that's all relative. Christopher Bell hasn't shown race-winning speed by any stretch of the imagination as a model of consistency. And in the 2 starts for JGR at the 600, he's finished 5th and 24th. Picked up stage points last year with a very good driver rating, just shy of 100. And then Chase Elliott, recent form, 12th or better in the 5 races since he's returned from injury. Again, hasn't shown outstanding race-winning speed by any stretch of the imagination, but he's gotten better as these races have gone on. His last 3 finishes at the 600, 33rd a season ago, but second and first before that. Consistently high driver rating for a talented race car driver that we know the longer it goes, the better his car is going to get, and you can understand why he's being priced accordingly.
Yeah, let's just start with Ross Chastain. I mean, I think that this is, the first guy where you say, okay, maybe we could see his price drop a little bit, but by how much? And I'd rather just see him look good in practice and qualifying before I get involved with him. Listen, he's not a great qualifier, and he didn't qualify well here last year. Again, I mean, this is such a long race. Is Ross going to get into trouble early in the race or late in the race? And he certainly led a lot of laps last year. He wasn't great early on in the race, but again, he's a driver that, like Chase Elliott and Chris Bell, I guess all 3 of these guys do make great adjustments and kind of find themselves there at the end. It's just a matter of, can Ross Chastain actually win on an oval? We talk about him week in and week out, but outside of, a super speedway win and a road course win, we haven't seen him get to victory lane. I don't know that this is the week that he does it. He's going to have a lot of speed to do it. And, he's got a lot of people that are pissed off at him. And you're going to have 400 laps of, pissed off people trying to hold you off. It's like everyone is going to act like Ryan Newman and not let you by. So I do think he has a long race ahead of him. But if he gets out front, he's going to be really hard to pass. Now, you hit the nail on the head when it comes to Chase Elliott and Chris Bell. I would say Chris Bell has shown the least amount of speed of those JGR guys. However, he's just been consistent. He's like, you know what? I don't have a race-winning car, but I'll take these 6th to 10th place finishes. If I can get a good late race restart, maybe I can mix it up. But other than that, I'm just happy, being in the mix. And I do think that, maybe late in the race if Chris Bell, like I said, he is a guy that at the end of the race just kind of figures it out. If he can kind of figure it out, kind of like a Chase Briscoe did last year, who kind of came out of nowhere to start, to really put the pressure on Larson. Unfortunately, he ended up spinning himself out. But I do think that very late in the race, we could see Christopher Bell look strong. However, I think you'll get a better price on him, after practice and qualifying, or maybe even live if that's an option. Chase Elliott, I just think he's overvalued at this point. I just haven't seen the speed out of the race car. It doesn't mean he won't be good. It just means he's going to have to hang around. I don't see him kind of shooting out to the lead or qualifying super well. So at this point, I think you'll find a better price on both of those guys if you wait till after practice and qualifying.
As far as some of the other drivers in the value tier, Kyle Busch, 12-1, Alex Bowman returning from injury. Very curious to see exactly how he looks in his return to Cup Series action. He's 16-1, and then the pair of 23XI teammates with those outstanding paint schemes in Tyler Reddick and Bubba Wallace, both at 18. Any of that quartet of drivers intrigue you, whether it's a guy you're looking to bet on, you're looking to bet against, either in head-to-heads or the outright markets, thinking that there's some value before we see how these cars unload?
Well, I do like Alex Bowman, Tyler Reddick, and Bubba Wallace. But first, I want to talk a little bit about Kyle. I mean, he's damn good here, but it's been feast or famine this year. I think at Darlington, he probably had the 4th best car, and it was kind of a distant 4th, but it was still there. But we haven't seen that kind of speed out of him other than Bristol Dirt and Fontana. And, this track is a completely different animal than all of those places. So I don't know that 12-1 is probably the price point where you would like to enter the market. Again, I want to see practice and qualifying, but I just, when it comes to, that's with Kyle. When it comes to Alex Bowman, I actually do kind of like Alex Bowman. I mean, he has Hendrick equipment, and I know that he's been out and it's a long race and is back. But listen, if he wasn't fully healthy with the way that these cars are and some of the safety issues that they've had, I don't think Alex Bowman would be in the race car if he wasn't 100%. So I do like him. He's showed speed at 1.5 miles before. And he's a closer. He's a guy that late in the race, if you give him a chance to win, he's going to do it. And I do think that, everyone calls him a hack. I call him clutch. I like Bowman. I think if, there's an argument to be made where you get 16 or 18-1 on him, I think now is a decent time to enter the market, just because I do think he'll qualify well with that Hendrick stuff and he'll be around. He can he's a guy that also can kind of work his way back up to the field. He might not do it as fast as the 5 does, but he is able to do it kind of consistently. And those are the guys that I'm looking to bet on when it comes to this super long race where it's a battle of attrition. Now, Tyler Reddick, this price is kind of shocking. You know, if you were to tell me last year that you would get him at a price like this, you know, I'd be shocked. But you know what? He just hasn't shown form outside of just the road course this year. So this is definitely a highline track where you're kind of searching for grip, and especially as the track changes, it's really important that you're able to find multiple grooves, whether it's the bottom or the top. And you're going to have to make your car both work at both bottom and the top, especially the transitions that the track is going to go through. When it's super hot and slick, you're probably going to migrate to the top. When it gets dark and cool, you're probably going to be right there on the bottom for a few laps. So if your car only works at one of those particular spots, it's really hard to maintain your track position. Tyler Reddick is great at searching. I do like Tyler Reddick a little bit at this 18-1 price. Bubba, I'll tell you what, if he has speed in his car week in and week out, it's just he doesn't recover well. And, you know, just to go back to what I said earlier, you have to be able to recover in a 400 lap race. You have plenty of time to do it. You're not going to do it in 1 or 2 laps. It's going to be methodical, but you're going to have to do it. You're going to have to compose yourself. And Bubba just gets so upset that if ever he makes a mistake, he tends to really let that bother him. And I do think that there's speed there. He showed speed at Kansas. I know that this is not a completely different animal, but I just think the longevity of the race really makes Bubba a little bit weaker than some of these other drivers like an Alex Bowman or a Tyler Reddick.
Hey, I mean, these are the kind of things you look for. And obviously it takes a different kind of disposition and maturity to win a race of this magnitude. That's why you don't take it lightly in terms of the pantheon of great race car drivers that can call themselves Coke 600 champions. Want to remind all of you, our loyal listeners, you can follow Chris on Twitter at ChrisWormy15. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there as well. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And when we look at long shots, I mean, I should call this the Ford bucket of sorts, full of recent disappointments. Kevin Harvick 20-1, Ryan Blaney 25-1, Joey Logano priced the same way. 3 names that you normally would grow accustomed to looking to try and make a case for, given their merits and the resumes that they've been able to compile in the Cup Series over the years. But I look at Kevin Harvick, 4 straight finishes outside the top 10 before coming to Charlotte. Ryan Blaney, 4 of the last 5 races, he's finished outside the top 10 and was outside the top 10 at both Kansas and Vegas. And then Joey Logano, Daytona, Atlanta, Martinsville, Richmond have been his best finishes this year. Those 2 short tracks, a little bit of hook and by crook to try and get there. 6th at Kansas, but never showed a ton of race-winning speed by any stretch of the imagination. And we never got to see him at his full capacity at Vegas. Look, these are 3 guys that I think have to be extremely frustrated with the equipment that they're working with. But the reality of it is you could be a great race car driver. You're only as good as the race car you're bringing to the track.
Yeah, this is one of those where, man, right now it looks like, well, I'm probably not going to touch him because you think that Hendrick's going to qualify. Everyone will probably qualify in the top 7 or 8. And I don't see either or any of these guys qualifying that well. However, these are great prices on really talented race car drivers. If for whatever reason, Ford or SHR or Penske hit on something, these are awesome payouts on these talented guys. Kevin Harvick, you know, he's the closer. He's a guy that will be there at the end. I imagine he'll just run 10th kind of all day. He'll qualify maybe a little worse than that. He'll work his way up on the long runs, but his short run speed and some of his restarts just haven't been as competitive as some of these other teams. Man, I'd like to think that Kevin Harvick could kind of go out on top here at the Coke 600, but they got to find something. It needs to click, and I think you're going to have to sacrifice a price here because it's going to be obvious if Kevin Harvick or the Fords have found something. But at this point, I still think it's a gamble to say that they will. That's why I'm not out on these 3. You know, if they all of a sudden show me something in practice, I think that there's definitely going to be some value. But I like Harvick the most out of all of them. I just think he gets the most out of a race car. Ryan Blaney, I mean, this is usually a track where he'd be really good. You think there's a lot of on throttle time, not a ton of tire wear like we see at some of the other 1.5-mile tracks. So, but still, you know, we haven't seen much out of him this year. And Joey Logano, I mean, yeah, he has the Paul Wolf effect, which means he's probably 1 or 2 steps ahead of a lot of the other crew chiefs when it comes to strategy. But there's only so much you can do when you don't have speed in your race car. So until I see something out of them, I think that getting in at this point in the week is still a little bit of a gamble, and that's something that I am not interested in doing at all.
Outside of the drivers that we've touched on already, is there anybody else who catches your eye in terms of a long shot price, or is this really going to be a race that we look at and go, hey, look, it's a separation of the haves and have-nots. You either have elite equipment and you're able to put together very fast laps on 1.5 mile tracks, or is there somebody else that we should be at least focusing on, maybe from a matchup standpoint, that we think are going to be matched up against second-tier drivers, or a guy that is a fringe top 10 or even a top 5 candidate?
Well, I think that, Daniel Suarez actually drove up to the lead and led some laps last year. I don't know if this is a track that he just kind of likes the feel, or his car they had a great setup, but that was early on in the race. He wasn't quite there at the end. But I do think that if this is a track that kind of suits him and he feels comfortable in his race car, I think he can make some passes, sitting at about 30-1. And the other guy would be Brad Kay. Now, here's the thing with Brad Kay. If he can run 1 or 2 laps that are competitive, let's just say top 5 or top 10, he's going to run well. He's just a guy that if the speed in the car, he's going to find it. I think Brad is a tremendous talent. And if he can just get up there, he'll be fine. But if he doesn't have speed in his race car, they kind of miss it on the setup. He's barely a lead lap car. So, he's kind of a high beta guy. If he can rattle off 1 lap, then he'll get the most out of that car. And I think he'll be top 10. But on the flip side, if they miss it just a little bit, he's finishing 1, maybe 2 laps down. So, but you're going to get paid out if he does look good. So that 40-1 price, again, not going anywhere. Even if he qualifies 6th or 7th, I think you're probably going to see upwards of 25-1. So I'd much rather wait and see that price than enter the market here at 40-1.
I think that's a great point. I mean, you've talked about it all season long for Brad. This is a guy that even if he goes out there and has the fastest 5, 10, 15, 30 lap averages on some of the long runs, isn't going to see his odds get crushed from 40-1 down to 15. So you're going to be able to grab a price and know you at least think that the 6 can be in contention from start to finish. The same can be said for Daniel Suarez. A little bit of a different storyline for some of the other guys that are out there. If Ford happens to land a setup, something that they haven't been able to do at 1.5 mile tracks, you could see those drivers see their odds get substantially shorter, to say the least there. Again, you can follow Chris on Twitter at ChrisWormy15. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, as always, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Worm, as we wave the green-white checkered flag on stage 3, although this has been a haphazard attempt at stage racing from us today for the Coca-Cola 600, probably should have added a 4th, and I guess the de facto 4th would be the best bet. And as you look at the betting market early on in the week, I know this is a war of attrition, a different handicap than what it would normally be for a 400-mile race. Where do you see a little bit of opportunity to get our money in good before the cars hit the track over the weekend?
Well, at this point, you got to predict where the market's going to go. We haven't seen practice or qualifying, but they did hang a price on a matchup with Kyle Larson. And, I know he's matched up against Denny Hamlin. I think that Denny was probably a 7th or 8th place car last year. And I think that Kyle Larson is better than he was last year, maybe as good or better than he was in 2021. So I like Denny Hamlin, I like Kyle Larson -134 against Denny Hamlin. That's at Canby Sportsbooks. Again, that is Kyle Larson over Denny Hamlin -134.
Do you want to hedge that with some sort of fictitious prop bet that's out there in terms of will Kyle Larson get into a dust up with Ross Chastain that either takes one or both cars out of the race or puts them a lap down? They get black flagged. I mean, there's a variety of different things that we can see unfold with the 5 car in some capacity.
Well, that's the other thing too. It's like either he beats Denny and wins the race, or he doesn't finish on the lead, or he has an issue, right? So, maybe it's a split, like,
Kyle Larson Kyle Larson top 3 over the Kyle Larson head-to-head matchup is what you're getting at here.
Yeah, he's either, listen, I think that right now where that 5 team is and a track like this where he is so good, we could see a snoozer. Now, I kind of hope not, just for the kind of racing sake, but we could. I think that Kyle Larson can go out there and lead a ton of laps, and especially if he qualifies well. I almost think for fun he might try to screw up some in qualifying, so that way he can go to the rear and then work his way back up and give the fans something to cheer for. But he made such quick work of everybody at Rockingham. It was like, hey, can you go to the rear again so you can do this? But I still think Kyle Larson's going to run well. I like to take matchups at this point in the week, so. And I think that could close, maybe -175, -180 if Larson looks how he should in practice and qualifying.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to be able to get fresh tires 18 laps into the run and just basically go by everybody else in the field like they're standing still, given what we saw last weekend. So he may have to work a little bit harder here, but there is no doubt the 5 car is quickly showing himself to be the class of the field week in, week out. And it doesn't matter if we're on high tire wear, we're at short tracks, we're at intermediates. We know that the 5 is going to have a piece under him, and it's just a question of keeping that thing clean to allow him to sail to a top 5, top 3, or even grab that flag in victory lane. All right, buddy. I know you're already in Charlotte, so we don't have to wish you safe travels there. Hopefully you have a chance to connect with a couple of the loyal Stay Green listeners if they find themselves trackside. Pre-race pull on normally as planned this weekend, or are you taking the Sunday off given some of the unique logistics that you're going to have to navigate through?
No, I plan on doing it. It might not be the hour and a half before we go green. I think that I found that it's not easy to do at NASCAR tracks, even when I have like full, kind of full support of the racetrack. It's just hard to find a great spot with a good connection. So once I kind of figure out the logistics for Sunday, I will post a time for the pre-race poll. And it's just something I enjoy doing. I get to, the interaction's great. People ask questions, and sometimes I learn things from other people that are participating. So look for that. I'll definitely tweet that out, but I'm just not quite sure of the time, but it'll absolutely get done.
All right. Even more reason why you should be following Chris on Twitter at ChrisOrme15. And I know we said last week for the All-Star race, we potentially were going to have a late ad. Probably glad we didn't do anything in that particular regard. I think my pre-week pick of Joey Logano is still actually trying to finish the race. So much like some of the horses that we saw at Pimlico for the Preakness Stakes, not exactly our best work. And it's why we told people no more than a quarter position when you're picking it outright at 16-1 early in the week for a track that none of these teams had been to in a cup capacity in 27 years. Buddy, enjoy the festivities this weekend. I know it is a busy opportunity for racing. Jealous that you'll be there for the trucks, the Xfinity, and the Cup Series. Hobnobbing with all the folks that are there. Hopefully we can put a little bit more money in our listeners' pockets. And again, for all those folks, I know it's a holiday weekend. Check out the site Sunday morning. We'll do our best to tweet it out when some of those bets go live. If we happen to find something for Indy, we'll get it out there. And if we happen to add something, which we will for the Cup Series, no doubt a head-to-head matchup or one of those derivative markets, we will share those. But in the interim, with a Kyle Larson ticket at minus $1.35 against the 11 car of Denny Hamlin, comes Sunday afternoon, Sunday early evening, Sunday late evening, and maybe into the wee hours of Monday morning. Hopefully we'll see you at the window.